The UFC is finally back, and this weekend we have a juicy fight night card between Garry and Carlos Prates. So I'm going to break down the entire main card with all of my predictions, all of my thoughts, and if I were to be a betting man, where I would be laying a pound note or two. So let's get stuck in to the top of the tree with the main event in Kansas City, which I have learned is actually not in Kansas, which is relatively bizarre. But what isn't bizarre is the fact that Garry stepped in on short notice, because we have precedents to now suggest that he is very much that guy. And before we get into the matchup, we need to just say what a 180 this man has done. To be honest, I haven't seen a bigger turnaround in fan support than Garry's in the last 6 months in a very long time. So shout out to him. And it just goes to show and prove that if you are someone that says they're about it, and you do actually in fact put your hand up when the call is made by Hunter Campbell, and you step up to fight the most dangerous guys in the world, people will respect that, and people have to respect that. And you have to tip your hat quite literally to Garry to step in on relatively short notice against someone as dangerous as Carlos Prates, because this man is exactly that, dangerous. Of course, it was meant to be Jeff Neal. That was a sweet matchup in itself, but this is equally good. So let's take a look and see what we think, because you look at the records between these two, they do tell two different stories. We've got Garry, who's coming off the first loss of his career. Now, as a young, hungry, up-and-coming, undefeated fighter, you would usually be asking the question, will that damage his confidence? Will that dent him as a fighter? Because some people feel undefeatable until they do get that loss, and it changes their whole perception. I don't think we're in any danger of getting that with Garry. If anything, I think he'll be even more confident knowing that he's gone out there with Shavkat, who everyone said was the boogeyman, who had a 100% finish rate, and he went out there and arguably should have won. So I think he would have taken a lot away from that. On the flip side, you've got Carlos Prates, who has a wealth of experience in Muay Thai, in kickboxing, and honestly, just in MMA in general. You go through his record and look at what this man has been doing. Maybe he hasn't been fighting at the top level of the UFC, but he's been getting tremendous exposure on big platforms and a lot of experience. LFA, Dana White's Contender Series, ONE FC, the UFC. So he does have quite a lot of fights on his record, and it's not as spotless as some other guys in the Fighting Nerds, but at 21-6, he's been around the game. And the reason I bring that to you is because when I was looking at this fight, I know we can look into it being short notice, and I know we can look into it at how dangerous Carlos Prates is. But just from first glance, I thought Carlos has never faced someone of Garry's caliber. And I do just think he is in that conversation now of the elite 170 pounders. I think that is fair to say. So whilst that is true, outside of actually facing someone of that caliber, he's done everything else he could possibly do. He's got a ton of experience in striking. He's got a ton of experience in the biggest organizations outside of the UFC, while still developing his brand. So he's had a couple of fights now in the UFC, which he's just been tested a bit, but he's come through it with flying colours, and most recently getting a very emphatic stoppage over Neil Magny, who they have both faced. So now we have mutual competition. And you don't necessarily want to sit here and do MMA maths, but the reason I'm saying this is because in live speed, I'm starting to sway with Carlos Prates, because when I first looked at this fight from Garry, I honestly thought he's going to be a little bit too much in regards to the movement. He's going to pepper Carlos from range, not necessarily with damaging shots, but just chip away at that lead leg, chip away at the body with kicks and some jabs up top, and then just get on his bike for the most part, move laterally, and then pick his moments where to grapple. And I actually think he'll look to take this to the ground. I think he'll look at this fight, understand that he's not as prepared as he can be, and wants to take the best path to victory, because as much a showman as Ian Garry is, he is smart and he is a cerebral fighter, and he won't necessarily engage on someone else's terms, which is not always great for the outcome of the fight, but it is good in preserving your health and your long-term career. And I do think Ian Garry is wired that way. So I say that because on one hand, I can see a world in where Ian Garry's extremely evasive and he just touches and moves for the most part, lands enough shot to stay up on the scorecards and maybe mixes in grapplings at times. And I can also see a world in where Carlos Prates just dictates the striking on his terms, and he manages to get Ian Garry moving backwards the entirety of the fight. And then when he does landing with more emphasis. Because you go back through Carlos Prates' career, this man so far has knocked out every single person he's encountered inside the UFC. And it's not as simple as he has tremendous power in his hands, because that would be doing him a disservice to his skill set. You look at how he sets up these knockouts. What I love about his style personally, it's all from southpaw firstly, which is something you don't see a ton of. And then what you don't see as much of from southpaw is elite striking. If you look at Muay Thai in MMA, you don't see a lot of Muay Thai from a southpaw stance and done well. You just don't. So what I mean by that is he has very good hand fighting. Very, very good hand fighting from southpaw, and this is what dictates his range. And when you look at this man's actual reach, you can see that it is 78 inches. He's got flipping long arms. So he hand fights with the lead, and then off of that, he's got a variety of attacks. He'll either step in with the knee, he'll either just hand fight and just go laser left hand, or he'll just go to the body with those front kicks. And he'll just mix these up. And he's got finishes from pretty much all of those. And then once you start biting on that straight left, he's going to set you up by putting you into his high kick. Very reminiscent, of course, of the most obvious example, Leon Edwards and Kamaru Usman. So he's got some high-level tricks. And the thing that I don't like about Ian Garry, what he does, is he has a bad habit at times that all tall and lengthy strikers have. You can see here, Ian Garry does have the height advantage, 6'3", and he typically always has the height advantage. But what happens is people get in the habit of fencing with their hands, especially if you've got someone that's lead hand fighting as much as he does, and then pulling back out of range like this, because usually they can get away with it. But Carlos Prates does a phenomenal job at keeping people at the end of his punches. And you go back and watch Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Ian Garry, the times that Shavkat had success actually was out of southpaw with the straight left, as Ian Garry was just pulling out of range in a straight line. That's what worries me. That's what worries me for Ian Garry. So if he is skirting on the outside and he does just plant his feet for a second, Carlos is going to be sharper. And I don't think Ian Garry's used to having that speed disadvantage. If he's moving forward and he's got control of the center of the octagon, I think in turn he could have success if it's on his terms and he's setting the rhythm and the tempo. But if he's not, and he can't get away from that lead hand battle, when he can't dominate the foot position and he can't get his exits, I think he's going to struggle. It's going to be interesting to see if he does stay orthodox the majority of the fight. Because usually he does, but he does like to switch, does Ian Garry. So it will be fascinating to see. Maybe he'll favour the southpaw more, so that lead hand battle is reduced slightly, and then it's a close stance battle, and you go back to your more traditional techniques like the jabs. And it takes away some of the potency, some of that backhand, which is so dangerous for Prates, because he's not someone who's going to shift stances. Or at least he hasn't shown that a lot in his most recent fight. So just breaking this one down, I think is super interesting. You can see leg reach is relatively similar. Obviously, Ian Garry, like I said, has got the slight advantage. There we look at the knockout record from Carlos Prates, 76%. The average fight time is the last thing that I want to speak about within this fight before I move on, because this is something we need to lean into. Yes, this is short notice for Ian Garry, but that's a man that's always prepared and he's always recovering well. I believe his cardio will be good enough to go a good pace for 5 rounds, no matter the weather. it does make me want to circle back to the conversation about me saying he wants to grapple. Does he lean into the grappling as much if it's the later rounds and he doesn't quite know where his gas tank's at and he's not as comfortable in that realm yet to be executing those techniques for 25 minutes at the highest level? That could be a question. Again, I'm just making myself doubt my original opinion, but I guess that's good. But this is the last thing that I want to end on, is just the average fight time. It's almost, or pretty much is half for Prates to Ian Garry. So this is a 5-round fight. And we do know Ian Garry does have the ability to go those rounds because he's also been preparing for those in Cage Warriors. But then again, it goes back to what I was originally saying. Carlos Prates has been there. He just lands with more devastating effect and gets people out there earlier. This is actually why this is a fun fight. So let's take a look at the odds and I'll go with my prediction. The odds are got Ian Garry as a -130 favourite. Interesting. I didn't quite think it would go that way, but honestly, I would say that is about bang on. I would say probability-wise, I would favour Ian Garry just to eke out 3 rounds to 2, more than I would put probability on Carlos Prates knocking him out cold, because we haven't actually seen anyone do that to Ian Garry yet. So from a probability standpoint, I'm going to go Ian Garry decision is where I'm going to go with that. But that is a very fun fight. And it leads us on to our co-main event, which I think equally will be a fun fight, because you look at this between Anthony Smith and Zhang Mingyang. By the way, the Tiger, what's his name? He's got a flipping cool fight name. Mountain Tiger. What an incredible name. Arguably one of my favourites. But when you look at this, I was going to say Ian Garry, it's just the bald heads and the green shorts, but not quite the same athlete as Ian Garry. Anthony Smith, slightly different proposition, but all jokes aside, devastating finisher inside the first round. Now I look at this matchup and I think, has he been done any favours? Oh, absolutely not. This is stylistically a horrible matchup, and it being his retirement fight, cheers the UFC, cheers. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you come out and say, I want to test myself against the best. You can bring anyone to me. I'll fight anyone in my last fight. I think I'm better than them all. Cool. You want to fight the biggest name for the biggest payday and the easiest competition. This is none of the above. So cheers to the UFC for feeding him to the wolves. But this is the business of the game, and you have to respect it. You can look at it emotionally, and you can look at it as in, that isn't fair and they should give him some legend that they could have a fun matchup and a good send-off. But you need to build the next star, and 205 needs a couple. And if you're going to give it to someone that is rising through the ranks, someone from the Chinese market would be a tremendous idea. So I think this is relatively smart business, because Zhang is a knockout artist and he poses real danger to Anthony Smith in exchanges of any nature throughout this fight. Anthony Smith, of course, is just a savvy vet. You look at his record, he's got what? This will be his 60th fight. We've seen him recently pick apart a contender who was rising in Victor Petrino. Do I think the man made a ridiculously silly error and got himself submitted? Yes, but he was still competent enough to notice it and execute it and actually get the finish. So Anthony Smith's always dangerous, but you can't help but feel, knowing it's your last fight, knowing that he's got a lot of miles on the clock coming up against someone who cracks hard, who's fighting for his life. You've already got one foot out. You're in the commentary. You're doing your podcast now. You're making your businesses work. This guy is fighting every day to be the best in the world, probably recovering like a beast. So I'm going to have to lean for a Zhang Mingyang. I think if he can weather the storm in the first of Anthony Smith, I think he'll get the knockout in the second. So that's where I'm going to go with that. Typically, I would favour the guy who's got the better experience and the more savvy vet in Anthony Smith, but I just think, knowing it's his retirement fight, knowing that you've got someone that is so dangerous with that knockout ability, legitimately. I don't think that's a great matchup. I wouldn't be shocked if he went out there and just snatched a neck in a crazy exchange and left on a good note, because he does deserve that. I'll put that out there. He has massively overachieved. Let's call that for what it is. The fact that that man was in a title is a major overachievement, and I say that in the nicest way possible. He shouldn't be successful. He says it himself. You listen to that man's story, his journey, the way that he came into this game of mixed martial arts, the length that he stayed and the length that he stayed at the top is seriously impressive. To think that he's gone through multiple organizations like Strikeforce and then of course in the UFC for such a ridiculously long tenure, that in itself is a remarkable achievement. And I think sometimes that gets forgotten. People will look at highlight reels and say, he did this against John Jones and he could have won the belt and he was never a champion, and you'll get podcast clips calling him this and that. But there's been a lot of people that have got into mixed martial arts that have either never made it even professional, but never made it professional in the UFC, let alone remembered, and let alone made it to the history book. So shout out to Anthony Smith, because sure, he won't have ever held a UFC title, but that doesn't always tell the full story. And some people even get into the dance and doing it for decades is a flipping championship belt in itself. So yeah, shout out to him. That was a bit of a side tangent, but it has been impressive to rack up that many flipping pro MMA fights, to go out there and get elbowed, unconscious, or just knocked out, boom, and your arms all beaten up, and you've not really had a great couple of months with your wife, and your family's going through a few troubles, and money's a little bit tight, and you've got a broken orbital, and you've got to go to training and get beaten up, and then you rock up and got to fight the best guy in the world, and he's hungry and energetic and ready to put on the line, and then boom, you get knocked out. To make the walk again and continuously do that, show up at the highest level and try and navigate the rest of it around it, it's hard for anyone to do. And you have to remember that as fans sometimes. We can't get desensitized to just, he wasn't a champion or he wasn't the greatest of all time. I'm hearing people put shade on Aldo's name. We can't just headline take away points anymore of he didn't beat him or he didn't win this. It's too black and white. It's too linear, and you miss all of the good parts of the sport and the good things that are going on, because guess what? There's only 2 or 3 of the greatest of all times. Michael Jackson's, Michael Jordan's, and Kobe Bryant's, and LeBron James. There's not many of those names. So don't look past people that also make up the fabric of this sport. So let's move on swiftly to Giga Chikadze versus David Onama. Now, I look at this fight first and foremost and will tell you straight into the lens that this will be the fight of the night. Signed, sealed and delivered. Hardwire $50,000 to Giga Chikadze and David Onama, because that's exactly what this is going to be. Now, I do believe that Giga's going to be a little bit more technical in the way that he can set up his shots, in the way that he can move and then pick his positions of where he wants to strike, because he does a good job usually of going to the legs, mixing up to the body, and then he's got such great dexterity and also ability to go high with it that he will mix up those targets and he will keep his opponents guessing. And he's unhappy to stand in the pocket and trade and go boxing 4-ounce hard leather with you. We've seen him do that as well. And Giga Chikadze has really only fought and lost to the very best. And that's one thing that stands out on his record. You look at who he's lost to. Calvin Kattar in a very, very good fight. Just before, I would say, Calvin just got to that point of his career where he'd had a lot of wars and it caught up on him a little bit more. And then Arnold Allen, who I believe could even be one of the best, if not the best, 145er in the division on any given day. So he truly has only fought the best. And that's just what I see in this fight against David. I know that David Onama is good. They've even got mutual wins. 13-2. He's still young in his career. He is coming from, I believe it's Eric Nixick and Extreme Couture. So it's a very good gym. He's going to be well game planned. And that is one thing that I think could be the difference here. Sometimes Giga if he's not able to get someone out of there, he can get caught in those exchanges of brawling at times and just being a little bit hittable. And I don't think you want to do that with David Onama, because he'll entertain that, sure, but I do just think maybe at Extreme Couture, the game planning, they're just going to look to take one of those openings, and I do think they do just have a little bit more horsepower as well in those shots when he sits and trades. So this is an interesting fight. You look at the odds for it, and you've got David Onama a minus 180 and Giga a plus 150. I would honestly say I would have those the other way around, because like I said, Giga does operate at a very high level when it comes to striking. So if Onama's not able to sort of mix it up and give different looks, and it's just a kickboxing match, that's not going to go very well for you. And I do think Giga will do a good job of sort of beating up those arms and taking a little bit of the sting away. And to be honest, I'm probably going to lean that way. I'm probably going to lean towards a Giga Chikadze decision. You can see not as much output per minute, which could be a problem for Giga. He's not got 5 rounds. He's had a couple of main events. This isn't 25 minutes, so he's got to get his work in from the get, and he's got to maintain the pace, because it could be a world where Onama is taking a couple of shots, but he's landing 3 or 4 more, and he's wading through the traffic. So I think Giga's got to get on his bike sort of early. You can see exactly as I say that, absorb per minute. Onama's got 5 strikes absorbed per minute to Giga's 3, and he even eats a couple. So this sort of has it set up to be a very exciting matchup. But I'm just going to lean towards Giga just nicking it on the scorecards. I think this one could even be very close. And I think we could even be arguing about a split decision come sort of Sunday morning. But that's the way I'm going to go for that. And then when it comes to Michel Pereira and Abus Magomedov, I don't think this is going to be close at all. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I don't think this is going to be remotely close. I really don't. Let's not forget Michel Pereira too quickly, because I don't care if you are not well versed in the game of Fluffy Hernandez, the middleweight division, and let's just say the trenches of some of those weight classes. I've said for a long time I believe him to be one of the most skilled fighters at 185 pounds, and I predicted him to do that to almost anyone what he did to Michel Pereira. Let's not forget the fact he was coming off an 8-fight win streak, and he was just catching a groove of his career where he'd moved up, so he didn't have to make a drastic weight class. He was finally growing into his body, and he was finally growing into his skill set, because you take a look at his record, 31-12, 2 no contests. This man has a ridiculous amount of experience, and he finally just started harnessing the craziness and actually refining the chaos, the controlled chaos, and understanding how to do that throughout a full mixed martial arts fight, not getting gassed, still maintaining his power, and doing it at a weight class now where he's a lot fresher. And that was getting really exciting. He just ran into a very difficult obstacle like Fluffy Hernandez. Abus Magomedov is not that. He is not. He did have a submission in his last fight, but he is not the pressure, the conditioning, or the wrestling or chain wrestling ability of Fluffy Hernandez. He simply is not. He is not the transition threat. He is not the submission threat. That is not the case. Now, can Michel Pereira find himself in a world where he gets tangled a little bit against the cage and gets his back taken maybe, or broken down into a position where an arm triangle or something's on? Sure. But I think the probability is super low. I don't think he's going to get into those positions. I think Michel Pereira is going to be way too much on the feet. I think he's going to be too savvy. He's going to be too skilled. I think he's going to show him too many different obstacles to get past. And I think he finishes him, to be perfectly honest. I really do. I think he goes out there and just puts him out. I wouldn't be fooled from the last loss. If I look at the odds, yeah, this is way too close in my opinion. Minus 155 and 130. I don't even think this one's remotely close on the odds, or it shouldn't be at least. I think Michel Pereira is just way too much. And him knowing that it's 3 rounds at middleweight, and he knows now where he can sort of let his shots go, and he's getting better at picking them and when to be explosive. I think this is a bad matchup for Abus Magomedov, to be perfectly honest. And I'm not usually so confident on calling a fight, but I really do feel good about that one. I really do. Fluffy Hernandez just grinding someone against the cage and getting a finish. He does that to everyone. He does that to everyone. I don't think Abbas is that level, but that's where I'm going on that one. I'm going to go Michel Pereira, first round KO. I think he just puts him out early doors. And then to come on to another fight, which is between, you got Randy Brown, who's still young, just sort of coming into his prime, but again, super experienced, not necessarily a ridiculous amount of fights, but a lot of fights in the UFC. And he's really learned on the job. And then you got Nicholas Dalby, who obviously came over from Cage Warriors and sort of played around with weight classes a little bit, found that 170 was his home, and he's a very tricky fighter, to be honest. He's got that weird breathing pattern, which can just be distracting. And I know it sounds silly, but it can be. If you're in front of a guy that is just breathing constantly, that can just throw you off your game and off your rhythm. Because a lot of people don't do that. In fact, most people don't do that. But Nicholas Dalby does. That's where he gets his tempo and his rhythm, and he sets off his striking with that. And he strikes on just a little bit of a different tempo and a slightly different rhythm. I think Randy Brown is very skilled when it comes to the striking, but he's a little bit more traditional. He's going to throw more traditional techniques, uses a lot of those long punches, which I really like. And we've seen how dangerous he can be against Muslim Salikov, who's super talented, by the way. Kung Fu master himself. So Randy Brown's got finishing ability, he's got submissions, and he's got knockouts, and he is a threat. And I do just think he's going to be a little bit more skilled than Nicholas Dalby everywhere this fight goes. Dalby is that vet, he is savvy, he is able just to understand how to win rounds and win fights and just do enough in certain positions and stay active and keep up on the judges' scorecard and be a grinder and be grimy and push a hard pace. He can do all of those things. Randy Brown's got a lot to prove coming off that fight with Brian Battle, who he arguably could have beaten, bearing in mind it was a very close split decision, and has beaten a lot of good guys. I think Randy Brown's just going to be a little bit too much. I'm going to go decision. I don't think he does get the finish, but I do, on the other hand, think this man gets the finish. Ikram Aliskerov. Again, I was very bullish on the fight earlier. I'm very bullish on this one. If you look at the odds, they are actually not even remotely close, I believe, for this fight. The odds don't come up, but I believe before I came on it, I think Ikram Aliskerov was a plus 400, and I think that would be fair. I think I would probably have it maybe even a tad higher, and I'll tell you why. Ikram has real ability on the feet. He does. I don't think he's an Israel, but I do think he is talented on the feet, and I do think he's just going to knock out Andre Muniz, if I'm perfectly honest. I don't think Muniz has the ability to get to the spots he wants to get to against Ikram. I don't think he's going to be able to wrestle him. I don't think he's going to be able to trouble him with his hands enough to then get him into a compromising spot. So I don't see him implementing his best part of his game, which is his grappling. I don't think you're catching arm bars on Ikram Aliskerov. I really don't. Bearing in mind that we've seen him grappling with Khamzat Chimaev in live MMA speed, and he couldn't get him down. Couldn't get him down, he couldn't wrestle him down, he couldn't get to any good spots. He had very good scrambles, he would fight for everything, every position. He would get back to his feet immediately, and not to do MMA maths, but can't see Andre Muniz doing that. And therefore, I don't think he's going to be able to get his jiu-jitsu game going at any point. And therefore, I just think Ikram's going to be too much. I think he's going to be too powerful, too strong, and just able to mitigate the best skills of Andre Muniz. So I'm going to favour Ikram with this. I'm going to go with second round TKO. I think the first round may start a little bit slow. Both guys kind of filling it out, touching it out. And then I think Andre Muniz is maybe going to overextend and just make a mistake in the second round, which is going to lead to an opening for Ikram. And I think he's going to finish the job with that. So that's where I'm going for that second round TKO. Let me know what you think is going to go down in the main card. Thank you for tuning in. And as always, keep it casual.